The sheriff looked at the mute waiter and scoffed. A mute guy working here? Really? The entire diner went silent. But Chuck Norris stood up. And he didn't need to raise his voice to make an entire town quiet. Late evening. A small roadside diner. Its soft yellow lights glowed against dusty window panes. The sound of spoons hitting plates, pages turning in a newspaper, and the crisp wind outside blended into a kind of Americana hum. A place where stories were told not through words, but through glances. Chuck Norris sat in a corner booth. Silver hair, an old khaki jacket, and a face still as stone, as if he were listening to music only he could hear. He didn't want to be recognized, not because he feared the attention, but because sometimes people just want to be ordinary. A traveler ordering a pulled pork sandwich and black coffee, watching the world go by. That night, there was a new face at the diner. Elliot, a young server, not yet 30, tall and slim, brown hair neatly cropped, always in a pale blue apron with a name tag pinned to his chest. But what made Elliot different wasn't how he looked. It was the silence. Elliot had been mute since birth. Not due to an accident, not trauma. Just something in his body never allowed his voice to form. He could hear but never speak. Yet Elliot never let that silence stop him from working, living, or smiling. He carried a small writing board on his belt, and his hands moved expressively, fluently. Regular customers had grown used to it. Some even learned a few signs just to talk with him. Because they liked him. Because he made them feel seen. Elliot brought coffee to Chuck. No writing needed, just a gentle nod and a smile. Chuck gave a nod in return, eyes following Elliot as he walked away. Something about the young man's movement was gentle, careful, like someone who'd learned how to walk through the world without disturbing it. The door jingled. 3 men walked in. The first is older, with grey hair slicked back and a police uniform. That was Wade, the town sheriff. Behind him, 2 younger officers with cocky smirks and loud footsteps. Wade ignored everyone except the waitress. 3 fried chickens, extra sauce, and black coffee. Chop chop, he barked, dropping into a booth by the window. Chuck tilted his head slightly. He recognized Wade. Not as a friend, just the name. Wade was the kind of man who stayed in the system not for justice, but for control. Chuck had met many like him. None worth remembering. Elliot approached. He smiled and placed down a glass of water, then wrote, "Hi, I'm Elliot. Can I take your order?" Wade looked up and studied him for a moment, then smirked. "What's this?" He turned to his men. "Dana Hyarsmoots now?" Elliot kept smiling, held out the board. Wade didn't take it. He snorted and pushed it back. "A waiter who can't speak? What kind of service is that?" Then he laughed. The other officers joined in, that mocking kind of laugh that fills quiet rooms. Some customers glanced over. Some lowered their eyes. Some frowned. But no one said a word. Chuck set his coffee down. Wade wasn't done. He waved his hands around, mocking signs, mimicking a child. "Oh, I'm Elliot. Me take your order?" "Ha." Elliot just stood there. His smile is gone. No anger. Just emptiness, the kind that comes from being belittled too often. An older woman near the window said gently, "Stop it, Wade. He's good at his job." Wade scoffed. "You're defending the mute. How do we know what he's thinking? What if he writes it wrong, spills something? In my line of work, that kind of liability's dangerous." He raised his voice at the end, ensuring the whole room heard. Elliot calmly picked up the board again and wrote, "I haven't made mistakes. I just want to do my job well." Wade took the note, crumpled it, and dropped it to the floor. "Just don't let me see you being clumsy near my table. I won't be responsible if someone trips over you and cracks their head." A small gasp escaped from a nearby booth. Chuck stood up. No one heard the chair move. No footsteps. But silence spread, like still water before a coming storm. He strolled to Wade's table, face calm, eyes like a knife, not angry, but sharp enough to make anyone swallow hard. Wade looked up. "What's this? Old man wants to butt in?" Chuck said nothing. He bent down, picked up the crumpled paper, and read aloud. "I haven't made mistakes. I just want to do my job well." He looked up at Wade. "You're right," he said, voice low and steady like sandpaper. "A server can't do wrong if no one gives him the chance to do right." The diner and its faces. Some people pass through our lives quietly, without noise, without echo, and yet their silence leaves the most profound impression. That night, in a small roadside diner, one such man was present. And so were others, each with a different face, past, and way of seeing the world. All of them collided to make a night no one would forget. Chuck Norris, the man who doesn't need to speak. He entered the diner around 8 p.m. Outside, the sky wrapped the town in a deep purple blue, like a wool blanket pulled gently over its shoulders. Chuck wore an earth-toned khaki jacket, a bull cap, and held a coffee in one hand. The other hand rested quietly, thumb tapping a silent rhythm only he could hear. He didn't need introductions. Didn't want them. At 70 plus, Chuck wasn't chasing applause. He was chasing peace. And peace, to him, was sitting alone in a corner booth, letting warm lamplight bathe a cup of black coffee. With no personal questions, no selfies, just breath and warmth spreading from the palms. He'd seen war, moving, fame, loneliness. But he never lost one thing, that sharp gaze, and a compass that never failed to tell right from wrong. He didn't talk often, but when he did, the room always listened. Elliot, the young man with no voice but always present. Elliot was new to the diner, but after just a few weeks, he'd become a familiar face to every customer. He couldn't speak, born without a functioning voice box. But Elliot never carried that as a burden. If anything, he moved through life lightly, as if he had learned to let his heart speak for him. He was tall, slender, and quick on his feet. His eyes met yours, always, but never in a way that made you uncomfortable. When someone placed an order, Elliot would bow his head slightly, hold up his board, and smile. That smile. It wasn't the forced service industry grin people wear to keep customers happy. It was a genuine smile from someone doing what they love. Whether wiping tables, pouring water, or mopping floors, Elliot showed care. He didn't speak, but he listened. With his eyes. He understood with his gut. He remembered. With his heart. He knew Mrs. Linda liked her food to be low sodium for her blood pressure. He knew Mr. Rannell didn't like anyone standing behind him while pouring tea, a leftover instinct from years as a soldier. Elliot never said these things. He just acted. In his silence, there was something that calmed people. He didn't need to say, "I understand." He just needed to be there, and people felt seen. Wade, the sheriff who no longer stood for justice. In stark contrast, Wade was the kind of man who announced himself with volume. Broad-shouldered, partially bald, a slight paunch, the look of someone seated in a command chair, too long to still look like a man of action. He used to be a good cop, or at least that's what he said every time he drank with the boys or spoke at a town hall. But over the years, Wade had traded service for control, duty for dominance. He didn't like Elliot. Not because Elliot had done anything wrong, but Elliot made him uncomfortable. Elliot was a mirror, a reflection of everything Wade had lost. Quiet dignity, earned respect, a sense of purpose that didn't need to be proven out loud. Wade needed eyes on him. He feared being forgotten. In the diner, Wade was loud, pointed, joked in ways that made others wince. He liked attention. But when Elliot arrived, so composed, so quietly competent, Wade felt himself disappearing. Martha, the diner owner who kept the lights on. Martha owned the place. She was nearly 70, small-framed but solid. Her silver hair was tied back neatly, apron on, and the smell of fresh pies followed her like a signature. The diner was her legacy, built with her husband, a WI veteran who had passed nearly 10 years ago. Since then, she'd kept everything the same, the checkered tablecloths, the carved wooden signs, like she was holding back time by sheer will. She didn't hire Elliot out of pity. She said, "I saw something in his eyes that didn't speak but understood. I need someone like that in my kitchen." Martha didn't talk much, but everyone knew. If you crossed someone she cared about, she wouldn't stay silent. The others. Who must choose to speak or stay silent? There was Lily, the daughter of a high school teacher, who often came in after class. She'd doodle with crayons on napkins and hand them to Elliot. She wasn't afraid that he couldn't speak. Kids have good instincts. They don't need words to know who's kind. Mr. Ronald, the ex-soldier, was always seated in the back right corner. He looked stern, but he'd tuck a tip inside a folded napkin every time Elliot passed by. Marcus and Pete were Wade's deputies. Not truly bad men, but they hadn't yet learnt to stand apart from wrongdoing when it came from their superior. And all of them would that night witness something. A mute waiter is being marked. But from then on, every choice, look and silence would be tested. Because of that night, some would mark, some would stand and watch, and some, without saying a word, would act. The diner stayed lit. Outside, the wind rustled the birch trees by the roadside, their leaves whispering like the murmurs of nature. Inside, the clinking of cutlery and quiet chatter faded. Something had shifted. A compass needle, ever so slightly, had begun to tilt toward justice, even if no one has noticed yet. Wade crossed his legs, arm draped across the back of the booth, eyes following Elliot, who carefully placed drinks at the following table. To Wade, it wasn't good service. It was organized nuisance. He raised an eyebrow, leaned toward Marcus and said, just loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "A mute guy serving tables? What if there's a fire? He's gonna yell fire with jazz hands?" He laughed. Marcus gave a stiff smile. Pete, the youngest, quietly turned his head away. Elliot didn't flinch. He bowed slightly, always diddling, and kept wiping the table with a faded cotton rag. Wade banged his hand on the table. "Hey, Elliot, bring me a sandwich, and don't forget the sauce this time, huh?" "Oh, wait," he smirked. "I'm talking to someone who can't talk. Isn't that ironic?" Elliot paused, but looked at him for a second. No reaction, no expression, just silence. But that silence, like a hairline crack, began to spread in the hearts of those nearby. Martha stood behind the counter, hand resting on the worn wood, eyes on Wade. She said nothing. She knew better. Sometimes speaking out turns things into battles. And women like Martha, who've seen war, seen grief, seen their businesses survive the shifting sands of time, know one thing. You don't always get heard just because you're right. Sometimes someone else has to stand up for the truth. Chuck Norris sat in the corner, stirring his coffee for the third time. Then he stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call out. He just moved. Each step is quiet. But the atmosphere shifted, like distant thunder rolling in across winter skies. He approached Wade's table. Didn't speak at first. Placed a hand on the chair across from Wade. Looked him straight in the eyes. "What are you trying to prove?" Chuck asked. His voice was gravelly and steady. Wade looked surprised. Leaned back. smirked. "And who are you?" Chuck didn't blink. Someone who once watched a silent man save an entire squad without shouting a word. The diner went dead quiet. Chuck began to tell the story. Years ago, in the Middle East, he'd been on a mission with a team. One mute soldier had saved them from walking into a minefield. He didn't scream. He didn't shout. He just used hand signals. And everyone lived. "He didn't need to speak to save lives," Chuck said. "He just needed to understand." Wade scoffed. "That was war. This is a diner." Chuck nodded. "But saving people is the same everywhere." Right then, a loud commotion from the front. "Lily!" The little girl came rushing in, screaming incoherently. Her mother, standing by the counter, turned just in time to see her daughter collapse. Her body jerked, hands rigid, foam at her mouth. The room froze. Someone screamed, "Call 911. Wade jumped to his feet. "What the hell's happening?" But no one moved. No one except Elliot. He rushed in. No panic. No words. He gently laid Lily on her side, removed the scarf from her neck, held her head and back in the correct position, gestured to her mother to stay back, signed quickly to those nearby, "Back up, stay calm." Chuck stood nearby, watching every move. This kid's done this before, he thought. Not just training, instinct, experience. Marcus asked, "What's he doing?" Chuck replied, "Saving her." 3 minutes passed. The seizure ended. Lily gasped. Her eyes fluttered open. Her mother collapsed beside her, sobbing. Elliot stood up. His hands were trembling, back soaked in sweat. But his eyes, still and calm, like a lake after a storm. Wade stepped back. Silent. No one looked at him. Every eye in the room was on Elliot. Phones began to rise. Chuck strolled to Elliot, placed a hand on his shoulder, whispered, "You don't need to speak, Elliot. Tonight, the entire town spoke for you." Martha stepped out from behind the counter. Her arms were trembling as she wrapped them around Elliot. A voice rose from the back of the room, slow, firm, cutting through the tension like a truth long buried. The one who said nothing saved a life. The one who spoke the loudest stood frozen. "Is that what we call justice?" Pete lowered his head. Marcus took a step back. And Wade said nothing. The room seemed to hold its breath. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the silence was no longer rooted in fear or awkwardness. It was heavy, meaningful, a silence that had just witnessed something extraordinary. A small man doing what 3 badge-wearing men couldn't. A few minutes later, Lily had fully regained consciousness. Emergency responders arrived, assessed her condition, and confirmed if she hadn't been placed on her side in time, her airway could have closed. It could have been fatal. Lily's mother, hands still shaking, turned to Elliot, tears filling her eyes, and gripped his hands. "Thank you. You saved her." Elliot nodded. He didn't write anything. He simply bowed, a gesture that said more than any words could have. Martha stepped to the center of the diner. She had lived through war, loss, and times when the diner nearly closed due to changing economies. But never had she witnessed something as quietly beautiful as that moment, when a voiceless young man left an entire room speechless with admiration. She looked at Wade, who was no longer lounging in his seat like a man in control. He avoided her gaze. Then, slowly, he stood. "This," Wade began, faltering. He did the right thing. No applause. No praise. Just a long pause, as if the entire diner waited for him to finish saying what needed to be said. But Wade couldn't. He turned and walked out, Marcus and Pete following close behind. No one saw them off. And for the first time in many years, the sheriff's retreating no longer carried the weight of power, only the loneliness of a man out of step with his town. Chuck Norris returned to his table. He took a sip of his coffee. It was cold now, but that didn't matter. Sometimes, it's not about whether the coffee is hot or cold, but the look two people share after something meaningful has passed between them. Elliot approached quietly. He held up his small writing board, now clean but for a single line. "I'm not used to people believing in me right away, thank you." Chuck read it and gave a soft smile. "You don't need others to believe in you, Elliot. You just need to believe in yourself. The rest, time will handle." Elliot nodded. In his eyes something sparkled. Not tears, but belief. The kind that only forms when someone has walked through fear and come out the other side. 1 week later, the story spread across the town like wildfire. A short video clip of Elliot saving Lily went viral on social media. Local newspapers picked it up. The radio mentioned his name, the silent hero. Martha never promoted it. She didn't need to. From that day on, the diner was busier than ever. Not because of the fried chicken or onion soup, but because people came just to see the quiet young man who didn't speak, but had made an entire town listen. Elliot kept working, just like always. Still didn't talk. Still didn't need to. As for Wade, after several formal complaints and public backlash, he was officially removed from his position as sheriff. His replacement? A younger officer trained years ago by Chuck during a community emergency response course. At his first town hall, the new sheriff said only one thing: "I don't need my deputies to speak well. I need them to act right." One quiet afternoon, Chuck prepared to leave town. He returned to the diner one last time. Elliot was wiping down tables. Martha was laying out a fresh batch of apple pies. Chuck didn't stay long. He shook Martha's hand, then turned to Elliot. The young man raised his writing board and scribbled, "I'll never forget that night." Chuck looked him in the eye and replied slowly, "You don't have to remember it. Just keep living like that night, and that's enough." Elliot nodded. He smiled. But this time, he didn't just smile with his lips. He smiled with his whole face, with his eyes, the eyes of someone who knew they were finally seen, not because they were different, but because they were valuable. A final lesson. We live in a world of noise, too many words and opinions. But sometimes it's the smallest acts. A glance, a bow, a hand on someone's shoulder that echoes the loudest. Kindness doesn't need a speech. It just needs to show up at the right moment. Elliot, the silent waiter, never said a word throughout the story. Yet he made an entire town listen. And Chuck Norris, a man used to applause and camera flashes, chose instead to stand beside someone being dismissed quietly. To remind us all, justice doesn't always come from the courtroom. Sometimes it comes from the dinner table, from the heart, and from how someone protects another without expecting anything in return. And you? When was the last time you silently stood up for what's right?